Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to talk about offences, penalties and miscellaneous in SARFAESI Act, which can be often asked in the law officer examinations. Like I said, these are high yield MCQs that would be asked in the examination. So do give a careful attention to this. What happens if there is a parallel SARFAESI and RDB action? What happens if there is a parallel SARFAESI and IBC action? What is the criminal liability when there is a contravention of SARFAESI Act? All these things we are going to see. So what we will cover, like I said, what are the penalties and offences for not following the SARFAESI Act? What are the penalties by adjudications? Then the protection in good faith. Of course, any action taken under good faith under SARFAESI Act is protected, and jurisdiction and overriding of other laws and inconsistent laws and limitations and other laws we will see in this chapter. Initially, we're going to see about the penalties and offences. For instance, if you have not properly filed or addressed the modification or creation of security interest, then it attracts a penalty of 5,000 rupees for every day. So a penalty of 5,000 rupees for every day for default in filing, modifying, and uh, intimidating sanction. Intimating sanction. That is very important. So when I say intimating sanction, it means that when a borrower has properly paid off the loan, you have to intimate it to the SARFAESI. This is very important because it deals with the borrower's ratings and other things. So in case if a bank has not properly done that, then a fine of rupees 5,000 for each day since the default continues is provided under the act. This is a very important section. It's a fact-based section, and a simple MCQ can be easily asked, like what is the fine and for how many days. All those things can be asked. So and offences and cognizance. So under section 29, if there are any offences relating to the SARFAESI Act, then a 1 year imprisonment with fine or both can be awarded. This is again an MCQ chapter and an MCQ target area, that what is the offences for contravention of SARFAESI Act. And section 30 talks about a court can take cognizance only upon a complaint by an authorized officer. So if there is any contravention of the SARFAESI Act, or if anything that is done against the SARFAESI Act, then the court should take cognizance only after a complaint by the authorized officer, not by any other persons. So that this is another important safeguard, because many borrowers try to extend the SARFAESI action by filing unnecessary litigations or applications in the tribunals and court. Now, what is the penalty for breaching RBI directions? So, section 30A, it has been involved. Like I said, ARC is regulated by RBI, and the certification of incorporation and everything is dealt with RBI. So, the ARCs should be registered with RBI. Like I said, this is one important concept, because in MCQs they'll try to trick you by asking an ARC should be registered under Companies Act or through RBI. So this is a very trick question, because many would try to think that ARC is a company, so it should be companies, but Companies Act under the registrar, but it is actually the RBI. So if the ARC fails to comply with the RBI directions, a penalty up to 1 crore can be imposed. Another very important high yield MCQ that can be asked, that is a penalty up to 1 crore. Remember this repeatedly, that in case if there is a failure to modify or file in the register of security interest, then fine of 5,000 for every day. And if there is any contravention of the act willingly, then imprisonment up to 1 year and fine can be awarded. And if if asset reconstruction company ARCs do not follow the RBI direction, then they can be fined up to 1 crore under section 30A. Of course, there are appeals. Appeals can lie under the the appellate authority. So when an RBI takes an action, an appeal can be filed under appellate authority, and this appellate authority is none other than the Central Board of Reserve Bank. Since an action by Reserve Bank, please do not confuse the appellate authority to be DRAT or DRT. That is only with regard to lender and borrower, and here it is because it is an issue between ARC and an action taken by the Reserve Bank. The appellate authority will be the Central Board of the Reserve Bank. And remember, in SARFAESI Act, where to file an application is very important. If it is between borrower and the secured lender, it is DRT. If it is between the action taken by the RBI to ARC, it's the Central Board of RBI. And if it is issue between the secured creditors and ARCs, then it would be the Arbitration Act. Moving on, protection and company offences, like I said, action in good faith. So any action taken under SARFAESI Act is protected by the good faith clause. So unnecessary, frivolous criminal action is not taken against the officers. Remember, good faith is not defined in the SARFAESI Act. However, it is defined under IPC and BNS, where it says with proper due care and attention. So when an officer does it with due care and attention, there won't be any action. But if he is negligent, or if he is taking action without looking into proper documents of the land, or if it is a mortgage property, or if it is he's not having a proper valuation, and if he is very negligent, then an action can be taken. But however, if the bank officer has applied due care and attention to details, then he has been given protection or a good protection or good faith. So that's a very important concept under Section 32. And offences by company, here, who is held responsible by offences under company? So this is very clever statutory wording, which says that anybody who is in charge and responsible of the company are deemed guilty. This is excellent because a company can have what is called as in English concept like shadow directors, who are not in fact directors, but under whose uh, direction companies may function. A good example would be the Infosys and their promoters like Narayana Murthy. So this is a very good example, uh, which a company says when the company has committed an offense, anybody who is in control of the company, it's not necessarily the manager, it's not necessarily the managing director, it's not necessarily the CEO, chief executive officer, even if it is a promoter who's not a director, who has a significant say over the day-to-day operations of the company, then he can be held, deemed to be guilty. This is very important. So, and of course, they have a rebuttable presumption. They can prove that the offense occurred without their knowledge. Say, for instance, if it is someone who is appointed by as an independent director, if they could prove that the offenses happened without their knowledge, then they would be protected. Otherwise, an offense is offend the company. Anybody who is in control of the affairs of the company will be deemed guilty. And jurisdiction and overriding effect, this is very important. No civil court has the jurisdiction to try any matter that DRT or DRAT is empowered to decide. Again, no injunction may be grant against SARFAESI Act. So if there is any SARFAESI Act, the only forum to try is DRT. However, there are clever ways in which borrowers or advocates who represent the borrowers try to play around this section by filing an actually a title dispute. So they would not challenge the SARFAESI action. They would not challenge anything. Instead, they would challenge the title of the property, because the civil court could have jurisdiction over it. Like I said, they have a roundabout way of challenging the title of the secured property. In that case, the civil courts do have jurisdiction. However, the jurisprudence in this area is evolving. DRTs has now been given powers to actually decide upon uh, tenancy issues. However, if the tenancy issue is complex and if the title issues are complex, the civil courts would have the jurisdiction. Supreme Courts in various recent cases have formulated a test. The test says that if the particular issue is competent to be decided by the DRT, then it can happen in DRT. However, if it is not competent to be decided by the DRT, then it must go to the civil court. So they do have an option, despite Section 34, to bring in the civil court by filing determination of title issues. So the bankers must be very careful before taking a property as mortgaged property. They must have a proper title search report. Now, having said that, the Supreme Court has time and again said that if the particular suit is filed as part of trying to stall the SARFAESI action, then that the civil court should not entertain this. So, however, for our understanding purposes, Section 34 is very important. This is another often asked uh, MCQ. And in Section 35, SARFAESI Act has overriding effect over other provisions which are inconsistent with any other law. So, if there is any other law that is inconsistent, the SARFAESI Act would prevail. However, you must understand that if there is a parallel IBC proceedings, then the IBC will prevail by virtue of Section 238 and the moratorium principles. Next, let us move on to the limitation. So, the Limitation Act very well occurs within is very well within the scope of the limitation periods. So, for recovery of money, it's generally 3 years, and mortgage it's 12 years. So, don't think that SARFAESI Act is not affected by limitation. The Limitation Act very well applies to the SARFAESI, and other laws are not barred. Now, SARFAESI Act is also complementary to RDB Act, that is Recovery of Debt Tribunals Act. So, parallel proceedings can happen provided the lender informs the appropriate tribunal of another proceedings happening. So, the most important thing is the SARFAESI and RDB Act are complementary to each other and are not in clash to each other. Like I said, today we have seen a topic which has the most ripe area for asking MCQs. One is, what is the penalty for not properly filing security or modifying the security? That is rupees 5,000 for each day of default. And what is the criminal punishment for violating the SARFAESI Act? It can be up to 1 year imprisonment or fine or both. And if an if ARC fails to follow the direction of RBI, then a fine up to 1 crore can be actually imposed. And if they have any issues with the action taken by the RBI, they can always go to the appellate authority, that is Central Board of RBI. And protection against good faith: if a bank officer has taken due care and attention, then he must be given protection. And the civil courts are barred from uh, taking any actions, injunctions, actions against SARFAESI, and the SARFAESI Act is in complementary with other laws, especially laws like RDB Act. With this, we come to the conclusion, and you can test yourself by the question that is, under Section 35, in case of inconsistency, the SARFAESI Act has overriding effect over other laws except for IBC. If there is insolvency proceedings, then by virtue of moratorium principles and Sections 238, the IBC would provide. Hope you enjoyed this lecture. Do share it with someone which is helpful for them who is preparing for the law officer examination. I will see you tomorrow with another lecture on SARFAESI, that is the most important cases determined by the Supreme Court in terms of SARFAESI. Thank you.